So I will just be happy to introduce our next speaker, which is Quentin Williams from the University of California in Santa Cruz, who will share his most recent developments and opportunities that one can find at ALS. So Quentin, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks to the organizers and thanks especially to you, Stella, for doing a lot of the legwork attached to this meeting. What I'm going to do today is I'm basically going to give an introduction to beamline 1222 at the advanced light source. And the basic structure of the talk is going to basically to discuss some of the logistics attached to the beamline, some of the facilities there, give some relevant examples that are recent of the flexibility and capabilities of our beamline. And then conclude with a general analysis of 1222's advantages, opportunities, and challenges moving forward. Later in the day, Martin Kunz will give a detailed talk on the upcoming ALS upgrade, which will immediately follow the APS upgrade. And he'll discuss the opportunities both at 1222 and around the ring associated with that upgrade. This is, of course, the image, which is not photoshopped, of the ALS, looking across the nice pink synchrotron and the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, so the basic techniques and features that we emphasize at the advanced light source are, of course, many of the standard ones that you would expect at a high pressure beamline, which include high pressure diffraction. We do both powder and single crystal. I give, in italics, I give examples of I give the indications of what I will give specific examples of later in the talk. We also do radial distribution functions of liquid and amorphous materials diffraction. We do laser and resistive heating, both in axial and radial geometries. I'll just remind you that radial geometries are critical for determining the viscous behavior and deformation mechanisms of materials at very high pressure. We're coupled with an excellent sample prep lab including gas loaders, laser millers, extensive microscopes. And one key aspect of this is that compress support over time, over the last decade or so, has dramatically leveraged advanced light source and Department of Energy resources for both experiments and human infrastructure. They both employ people and give equipment, including detectors, gas loaders, single crystal diffractometers, new laser heating setup, and an excellent ALS dedicated staff member, as well as extensive instrument design support. And that ongoing ALS support supplements the initial money that was spent about 15 years ago to construct this super bend beamline that was matched by UC, Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and Los Alamos. The most important part of any beamline, other than the beam perhaps, is of course the staff. And I want to emphasize that we have an absolutely first-tier and superb staff there. Martin Kunz, as I mentioned, will talk later today. We have Bora Kalkin, who's a long-term veteran of ALS, who's an expert on amorphous scattering, among other techniques. And we recently hired Kat Armstrong for a PhD at the University of Bayreuth and some time at UC Davis as our newest addition to our staff. And we have basically three of our staff goals are well-defined. They're basically enable and assist users, develop new techniques and capabilities, and conduct research, collaborative or otherwise. And that is what actually makes our beamline run. And just since many of you are not familiar, if you are not perhaps to the west of the continental divide, I just want to emphasize what the nature of the partnership is and what the level of beam time is that is associated with the advanced light source. So we have an approved program at the advanced light source that gets basically renewed every 3 years. And we're guaranteed at least 35% of the beamline at 1222. And in exchange for that commitment of time, Compress is committed to beamline staff members. So it's a very synergistic relationship. And we award time in accord with reviews from the ALS's general user proposal review system, which actually divorces the Compress and the Compress PI, which is me, from assigning time. Now, the great thing about this is that this actual proposal didn't process because we have a very strong community who are anxious to get time at the advanced light source actually results in Compress users getting between 50 and 75% of the beam time in each beam time cycle. That's actually dropping with time because we've become very popular among chemistry and more physics-oriented users. Just to review, because many of you are, some of you are very familiar with the ALS, but many of you are not. We basically have a the sort of standard over allocation of or under resourced time rates for our beamlines. We basically have 3 or 4 to 1 oversubscription rates almost all the time, which is fairly standard for most synchrotrons at this juncture. And our publication rate, as I'll show you, with our have been progressively enhanced with time as our capabilities have increased. So among the unique and usual capabilities at 1222, which again leverage the compress support and ALS investment, are that one, we're the only hard X-ray high pressure diamond anvil cell facility on the West Coast. And I want to emphasize also that we'll be the only one with major geoscience time in the United States while the APS is upgrading. So that's a pivotal part of basically having facilities that have complementary capabilities, is that if one goes down, one can use another facility. I believe a unique capability of our facility is that we do radial diffraction within the diamond cell combined with in situ laser heating. And that's critical for determining high pressure, high temperature slip systems, as I'll discuss in a moment. We also do multi-grain crystallography under high pressures. And in addition to the standard powder diffraction, we also do single crystal diffraction under pressure as well. And we have, of course, gas loaders, laser heating systems, and sort of the standard base level of capabilities. Since many of you have not visited there, this is sort of the critical 3 meters of the beam line, which is, of course, X-rays come in from the right and are detected at the left, and then basically beam shaping optics and miscellaneous mounting stuff for the diamond anvil cell, including our single crystal diffractometer, are basically shown here. And of course, the real estate here is extremely valuable, and it is used to its maximum, as you might be able to tell. Sample prep lab has laser miller, gas loading, stereoscopes, hoods. It's basically a well-equipped sample preparation lab in some very elite space, let's put it that way. Difficult to access, or difficult to obtain space right above the ring. And of course, we do laser heating in both the axial, which is basically down the axis of force, and radial geometries, where the laser comes across from left to right here, and the X-rays are actually go vertically on this figure. And I'll talk a bit about the radial diffraction aspects in a moment. And this is just to emphasize that we do powder diffraction as well, and with sort of standard set of detectors and samples mounted over in here. Some of the recent things that we've done include, for example, multi-grain diffraction. This is a relatively emergent technique, which effectively involves taking the diamond anvil cell, rotating it around an axis perpendicular to the X-ray beam, and looking at the diffraction from individual crystallites within the sample here, which is schematically shown in this work from Brian Chandler. And effectively what this allows is it allows one to do the grain statistics for orientation of different crystallites within a sample. So in this particular example, what's done here is to basically take olivine and convert it to its high pressure phases, magnesium-wilstite and bridgmanite, and then basically deconvolve this mess of a pattern into all of the crystallites and their orientations associated with this, with the decomposition of olivine to perovskite and magnesium-wilstite and its subsequent texture evolution. So in this instance, for example, a 110 twinning in perovskite was recognized, which may heavily contribute to the stress relaxation mechanism within this material. So this is a technique which we've instituted at the ALS in the last 3 years, and which has considerable value for characterizing materials at extreme conditions and looking at the orientations of those materials at extreme conditions. We also do, as I mentioned, laser heating radial diffraction. And in this particular instance, I take an example of a collaboration between Rebecca Fisher's group and Lowell Miyagi's group with collaborators. And in particular, what you see here is this is data on iron silicon alloys, where particularly what's shown here is iron 5% silicon. And what the advantage of the laser heating radial diffraction gives is it actually allows the ability to determine textures at the extreme pressure and temperature conditions of Earth's interior. Everyone knows textures are highly temperature dependent. Different slip systems become active at high temperatures. And our ability to basically do X-rays, radial X-ray diffraction synchronously with laser heating allows us to access an entire PT regime of critical importance to not only deformation of the deep upper mantle, the transition zone, the lower mantle, and potentially the inner core as well. And in this particular example, published earlier this year, what's shown here is sort of the standard X-ray diffraction pattern of a radial diffraction sample. And these are caked diffraction image, so effectively the diffraction circles have been unrolled. And what you get in this instance is the wave-like deformation in the diffraction lines is associated with the elastic deformation of the sample, whereas the intensity variations are associated with the plastic deformation of the sample. And so modeling the variations in intensity basically gives you insight into what the deformation mechanisms of the sample are. So here's a sequence of patterns of range of pressures going from the alpha BCC phase of iron with a little bit of silicon in it to the epsilon, to a mixed phase regime of both the alpha and epsilon HCP phase on up to the pure epsilon phase. And then the epsilon phase mixed with a little bit of gamma phase following or during laser heating itself. And you can immediately see that the stress relaxation that takes place on heating relaxes the elastic deformation within the, shown by the diffraction lines, but the intensity variation information and the texturing information is preserved. So from this, you can actually get the temperature dependence of deformation mechanisms. And that's shown at the bottom here with these inverse pole figures taken between as a sequence of heating between 43 and 46 GPa, where in the hexagonal plane indexing scheme, you get a progressive orientation that evolves around the 0001 direction and probably a bit around the 11-2 direction as well under compression. And of course, the ultimate goal here is to determine something about whether this can explain the anisotropy within Earth's inner core, which is seismically faster along the polar axis relative to the axial axis. And the tentative answer is, of course, that this is one alloy that could potentially produce such preferred orientation. Lowell Miyagi's group has heavily deployed this technique. He's worked on radial diffraction of bridgemanite, for example. And this is work by Samantha Cooper and his group. And again, these are inverse pole figures with the 001 direction down here, 100, 010. And again, these are indicating what grows in as you heat the samples at high temperature. So you get away from the transformational texture and into the steady state texture of the material as it's deforming. And you can see that there's basically an evolution as you heat it in the 100 direction that appears to be associated with hot texturing of the sample. So again, this is critical for determining the means by which the lower mantle deforms. We also do single crystal diffraction, the advanced light source detector, single crystal diffractometer. We actually have two end stations that we can do single crystal diffraction on. And we've actually looked at a sequence of fairly complicated phases under compression. This is the well-known amphibole tremolite, which appears to have, where we've done single crystal work, up to about 40 GPa on it. And it appears to have a relatively nuanced but complex compressional mechanism, which is associated within the I-beam, within the amphibole structure, that this appears to be associated with this I-beam going from basically concave outward to basically flat to convex inward under compression. And that seems like it's a important aspect of metastable compression of a hydrous phase like the amphiboles. So again, this is the type of nuance that you cannot get from powder diffraction. It's critical to get the single crystal diffraction work. And we've had a considerable success at getting excellent single crystal diffraction data at 1222. Other phases that we've looked at in the past include lawsonite, which is probably the dominant carrier of water within hydrated basalt into Earth's upper mantle. And there's a well-known phase transition in this material, which had been known for 20 years, but had not been successfully indexed until we did it a few years back. And again, these are relatively nuanced phase transitions, which may be important for the stabilities of these minerals, but ultimately would be impossible to detect without single crystal diffraction. So for example, the change between 9.3 and 9.7 GPa is actually a flexing of the Si207 group in this particular instance, and a shift in basically the octahedral sites becoming crystallographically distinct from one another. I'll also give the example of tourmaline, which again, we've looked at some very complicated phases and detected some fairly nuanced structural changes, which could only be detected at using single crystal techniques. You can see that perhaps this is best illustrated by the the six-fold arrangement of tetrahedra within the tourmaline structure, ultimately undergoing a little bit of elliptical distortion at high pressures. Our laser heating temperature system was rebuilt and completely redesigned 2 years ago, and it now gives extreme accuracy. And again, we do use the gray body approximation in this, which is as good as we can do at the moment. And you can see that we can basically invert for extremely accurate temperature measurements. And then using a peak scaling method, we can basically invert for the entire shape of the temperature distribution of a laser heated diamond cell, which is actually critical for interpreting measurements. And that was described a couple years ago in reviews of scientific instruments. We've done a decent amount on improving the characterization of laser heated high pressure environments. So one novel study done recently was to basically take a laser heated sample and translate it, the whole thing, sample, laser heated spot relative to the X-ray beam. This is illustrated on the left here, where we're basically doing X-ray diffraction across the temperature gradient associated with the X-ray beam. And what we're looking for here is basically what to make a physical measurement of what thermal pressure is. Now, thermal pressure has been a concept that's been around essentially forever, as long as thermodynamics has, and it's been recognized as an important effect in laser heated experiments for 40 years. But no one's actually had measured the spatial dependence of thermal pressure across a diamond cell, across the laser heated diamond cell sample. And the question goes down to whether this is whether the diamond anvil cell, the heated environment, is isochoric, isovolumetric, or whether the sample is weak and distributes the thermal pressure associated with heating across the entire cell. And what we found is that there's actually extremely strong peaking of thermal pressure across this. This is shown here, where thermal pressure is on the left, temperature is on the right. We're heating a sample of olivine here. And this is the image of the pressure across this cell. Whoops. This is an image of the pressure across this cell, where basically the magnitude of thermal pressure is extremely highly peaked right at the temperature peak of the sample. So, and this is only 1000 K temperature change, and we're getting basically 4 GPa of thermal elevation associated with it. The red result is the measured temperature gradient, and the blue result is a model result. And so the point here is simply that thermal pressure is actually is prospectively a larger than previously considered correction within diamond cells, and that we may be even in relatively weak materials, that the peaking of the thermal pressure may be rather close to the isochoric solution of alpha KT times delta T, which for experiments at 3000 or 4000 Kelvin is actually an enormous effect on the order of multiple tens of GPa. So some of the strengths of 1222 are, we have just outstanding support from our facility, both in terms of human, and that's Martin Kunz, and infrastructure. They give us detectors, diffractometers, and we heavily deploy the facility support. They also give us a gas loading system. We have a really dedicated but moderate-sized and productive user community. We are a single beamline, and our user community is some is localized, but not uniquely localized to sort of the west of the continental divide in the United States. We do have international users as well and East Coast users, but that's the preponderance of our user community. We feature a really wide range of deployable techniques, whether they're axial, radial, single crystal, amorphous diffraction, two-sided laser heating with temperature measurements. We also do external heating, which I did not emphasize in this, and really an excellent sample prep. Another advantage of our facility is that we have a really high caliber set of complementary beam lines, which can be scheduled in tandem with high pressure diffraction or high pressure usage of 1222, which include infrared beam lines allowing micro diffraction primarily for quench samples, small molecule crystallography and tomography, which could also be deployed for quench samples. And nationally within the United States, we're probably the major hard X-ray game for diamond anvil cell work during the APS upgrade. Our near-term opportunities, which is one part of this talk, is that the ALS upgrade, which again, as I mentioned, will follow the APS upgrade. When that's completed, ALSU will start. Will lead to a brighter beam for our facility, and Martin Kunz will discuss that in detail late this afternoon, as well as the advantages for other ALS geoscience-related beam lines. As I mentioned, with our scheduling abilities, we can carry out complementary experiments on one trip, and many people have deployed this to do IR and diffraction simultaneously. We expect enhanced usage of our facility and a probable expansion of our user community during APSU. And what our beamline offers is that really beam time for experiments that don't necessarily require the highest brightness, but can't be done in home labs. So we are extremely valuable from that perspective. Medium-term issues, we have an upcoming shutdown, of course, and that's endemic, but that's both a pro and a con because it's probably in 3 years, depending on the APS timing, but it will upgrade our facilities. One of our threats is that we have a lot of greater user command coming from chemistry, materials, and physics community, and that has over the last 3 years impacted our GU allocations for geoscience users. And we have a great partnership with ALS management, but reinforcing our prioritization by the community always improves our ability to leverage resources from our facility. So just to reiterate, we have first-year infrastructure, excellent staff support. We're highly responsive to community input, and if users come to us with requests for new capabilities, we try and accommodate them, and often we'll orchestrate major efforts attached to interesting requests, let me put it that way. And it's easy to deploy multiple probes at different beamlines during a single visit as needed. And if you want further information, that's our website. I will note that this is a particularly inconvenient time if you are interested in time at the ALS, because our deadline for beam time requests is tomorrow. With that, I will stop there.
Okay, that was great. Thank you, Quentin, for sharing all these exciting opportunities that one can have at your beamline. And we will go on for questions. We have one from Karato. So if you could please unmute yourself and start your question.
Nice talk. I'm very happy to learn that you guys are experimenting temperature effects on deformation. Mm-hmm. That's great, but still very low temperature. The general rule is those plastic properties of preferred orientation scale with the T over Tm, melting temperature. Homologous temperature. Is there any prospect of going to realistic homologous temperature, like inner core 6,000 K, so the homologous temperature, 60% of homologous temperature would be 4,000 K. Otherwise, it's a low temperature regime. So look at olivine. Low temperature, high temperature, plus preferred orientation is completely different.
Shun, what a straightforward question.
Yeah.
So, what you're complaining about, I think, is that, the data I showed there was up to 1600 K-ish. And actually at the pressures that those experiments are being conducted at, the T on T sub m is not so severe. But what I would simply point out is that as with everything in high pressures, as you're well aware, experiments are always incremental. So you have to start at somewhere to get someplace else. So
I just want to know your plan was.
Right, of course. So of course our net goal is, of course, to access temperatures of, let us say, say 3,500, 4,000, 4,500 K at high pressures. I mean, especially for inner core conditions, that is actually quite a challenging experiment because, of course, the size of the sample at that stage is extremely small. So, or the size of the heated region of the sample is extremely small under those conditions. So it is challenging. But what we are doing is we are making the first steps and making the precursory steps that are necessary before we move towards the extraordinarily challenging techniques of, let us say, doing radial diffraction at simultaneous PT conditions of the inner core itself. That is, of course, the ultimate goal, because after we're done with that, we can all go home, I guess, and say we totally understand anisotropy in the inner core. So,
very good. Yeah.
So thanks for the question. That was actually a very important and timely question.
Very good.
Hi, Quentin. I'd like to ask specifically with regard to the very nice Chandler work, but more generally, it was sort of sprinkled throughout your talk and Vitaly's talk. What is the community? How is the community should we be approaching software needs and cyber infrastructure needs?
Oh, that's a great question. And there's a lot embedded within that question, of course, because cyber infrastructure means I can interpret your question in multiple ways. One of which is, basically the software capabilities of a given analysis technique, let's say single crystal X-ray diffraction, versus the other way I could interpret your question is basically to make sure that user information is archived in the best possible way. So I'm not sure which of those avenues you are approaching, but I think the key mechanism in answer to your question is, we do have excellent programmers at the ALS. I know they have them at the APS as well. And so the question is, for many facilities, is engineering the time of superb programmers. So putting pressure on, advocating with Beamline staff who can pass and with PIs who can pass the pressure up the line to management to basically say, we need more cyber support, cyber infrastructure support is actually critically important. So, if Beamline scientists or PIs get requests from folks, we can apply pressure, and I mean that in a figurative way, not a literal way, to folks who actually control resources, like excellent programming. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but if you'd like to clarify it a little more, I can certainly go there as well.
No, I think that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Quentin.